It's the Kink Consultant Podcast, where we're turning up the heat on all things kink and dating, relationships, and pop culture. So close the door, plug in your headphones, and let's get down to it. Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kink Consultant Podcast. I am here with Gabrielle Cassel, a queer sex and wellness journalist who writes for some of the sexiest magazines that we're all reading: GQ, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health, Men's Health, and many more. And I've invited Gabrielle in today because she wrote an article that literally was like a punch to the stomach with how accurate it described the last few years of my dating life. First of all, Gabrielle, welcome, but I'm just going to tee up the title of this article. I'm a sex writer, so why is my dating life terrible? Welcome, Gabrielle.
Hi, Amanda. I'm so happy to be here. And while I'm happy to hear that you and I have this connection based on the topics I've written about in the article, I'm also sorry to hear that this experience is more universal than just my own.
I know, it's tough. Caveat that I did meet someone in September, but it was no easier. There were hurdles. I think it was 3 or 4 months of just tension as we navigated it. And I'm not angry about it. But when I read your article, I was like, first of all, where was this article 6 months ago? But second of all, probably no one could have told the story better or explained it as well as you did. So, Gabrielle, please, I would love if you would just share a little bit about yourself. I gave my intro from my perspective, having read a lot of your work, and I think I've been featured in some of your articles as a kink expert. But yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I'm happy to get to collaborate in this medium because I've gotten to interview you as the expert. So how fun for us to be in conversation today. I'm a queer sex journalist. I've been writing in the space primarily at the intersection of queerness, pleasure, and well-being for a decade now. In addition to being a journalist, I'm also in school to become a sex therapist. I'm 2 years through a 3-year program. So, the goal is ultimately to be a queer-affirming therapist offering education and care and affirmation through the in-person format, when for so long I've been offering it in the written format.
I love it. Congratulations. That is no small feat. That is amazing.
Yes, 13 months left until graduation, but time's going to pass anyway. I'm in no rush to get through it. It's fun to get to be a student again.
For the topic you're studying, 100%. I don't know if I've ever been excited to be a student again. You strike me, though, as someone who enjoys tests of endurance, whether that's fitness or education. You have that vibe. Am I correct?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I will take this. Words of affirmation is my love language, so you're really stroking me right now. Thank you.
I love how self-aware you are. See, I love when I have other coaches or someone who's going to be a therapist on, and it's like, you're so self-aware. You're like, yes, that is my love language. Thank you very much. Okay, so you have a lot going on then. You are juggling a lot of different things. How do you even have time to date with this workload?
That's a really good question. I guess some personal information about me is in addition to being a journalist and being in school, I'm really into CrossFit. You mentioned me being into endurance. Yes, I'm very into exercise. And so the compromise that I've made for myself when I got into graduate school is, okay, I got to slow down. I'm not going to be quite as competitive in the sport of CrossFit. That's kind of my exercise of choice as I was before enrolling in graduate school, so that I can continue to nurture my community, my friendships, and also date, because ultimately partnership is a thing that I want. And so I have to make time to prioritize it. And so for me, the making time came at the cost of exercising to sort of the same intensity, degree, and time as I was before entering graduate school.
It is so refreshing to hear someone come on here and say, oh, I can't have it all. I had to make a list of priorities and then rearrange them. Because so many people are like, I want to meet someone. I'm like, oh, so what are you doing? And they're like, well, nothing.
Yeah.
So you're prioritizing it.
I'm doing my best to prioritize it. I, for a while, joined a rock climbing gym. There was all this hoopla about rock climbing gyms being kind of the place that you might meet someone, right? There was stories online, Instagram, and people being like, oh yeah, I met the love of my life at the climbing gym. And so I was like, okay, I love to exercise. This is a great way for me to put myself in places to meet potential other singles. And I went twice a week for close to 6 months, and that was just not my experience. I don't know if it's because I was giving off a closed energy in a way I wasn't aware of. I don't know if it was just the particular vibe of my gym, working really hard to make it a safe space for people and not wanting to make people uncomfortable. But yeah, I did not find it to be I do not find it to be a space where there was like really any romantic or sexual connections, attractions. I mean, not even like any first steps in that direction.
I'm kind of surprised at that for a couple of reasons. Number one, from what I know of climbing gyms in Brooklyn, they're like a little hotspot of incestuous dating.
Mhm.
So maybe you saved yourself from that. I guess that would be my second question. You're based in New York, right?
I've beep-bopped around New England. I'm currently Connecticut based.
Oh, okay.
I did live in New York City for 5 years when I was jumpstarting my career as a journalist. But as a freelancer, I now get the gift of living wherever I want. I can write from anywhere in my pajamas in bed. So Connecticut is my place of choice.
Yeah, that's how I podcast too, except I do put on clothes. But yeah, it's same thing. Maybe it's just not happening in the Connecticut gyms. You need to go on a little train ride to Brooklyn for that type of
Well, Amanda, I cannot be doing long distance anymore. I've been there. I've done that. I don't have it in me.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, but now understanding you're from Connecticut, I am going to keep referencing this article because my takeaway was you were dating a wasp. And Connecticut, that tracks a little bit. We're not generalizing, except I am. How did you meet the person? I know I'm going to go deep on this article. I want to tease it a little bit. It's on Cosmopolitan, but you can find it in the show notes as well. So, how did you meet this waspy fellow?
So let me just give the spark notes of the article.
Please.
Basically, this statement is I love being a sex educator. I really feel that it's what I was meant to do if I was meant to be someone who is employed and labors. And despite that, despite loving it, despite really being passionate about it, for a long time, I felt that my love life is the thing that has to suffer in order for me to have this career. And the reason that I felt that way is that really as soon as a person finds out what I do, I'm a queer sex educator, I'm a journalist, and one of two things happens. And this is simplifying it a little bit, but not a lot. Either immediately I'm oversexualized in this way that ultimately feels dehumanizing to me, and I have a hard time eroticizing. And what that looks like is a person assuming that because I write on these topics and educate on these topics, for example, I teach a strap-on sex workshop online, people assume that I can then become the person that is going to fulfill whatever their fantasy is.
Yeah.
And not just fulfill their fantasy, but really be the first person to hear that fantasy, receive it with care, not shame them, and then give them whatever experience that they have been fantasizing about in their mind. And while I long to be a partner in general who helps a partner achieve their fantasies, like really explore whatever it is that they're into, when a person puts me into their fantasy, I'm not actually a person. I am this kind of like dehumanized thing because we're not working together to co-create a scene or co-create a sexual play situation. I'm just like jumping in and filling the role of what they've visualized over and over and over again. And so honestly, that's been really not sexy to me. It makes me feel not like a full human. And it makes me feel like I am then just this one side of myself, which is my sexual education knowledge. And on top of that, I don't enjoy or perform or am interested in all of the topics that I teach on. So there is a lot of assumption that just because I know about something means that it's something I am really into. And that assumption happens without a back and forth conversation about like, hey, Gabby, what are you into? And the loss of that opportunity really robs us both of connection.
So what I'm hearing is really the lack of curiosity in that totally robs you of a fulfilling dating experience.
Yeah. So that's kind of the one boat is I'm immediately over-sexualized. The other boat is that I'm immediately written off altogether because I think there's a lot of reasons. One is my career feels too salacious for them to ever introduce a partner who works in sex education, who is a sexuality professional, to their families. Right? That has to do with their own kind of like connection to purity culture, to their own shames, to their own kind of like desire to be hush-hush about sex. Sometimes it's about feeling like, oh, well, I'm not going to be good enough in bed for Gabby because she has all this knowledge, or I'm not going to be quote unquote freaky enough or quote unquote kinky enough for Gabby just based on what I see she's writing about online. And so it's tough because I really long for romance and I really long for sex and desire and connection. And I've had a hard time getting past those initial reactions to my career.
Yeah, that's extremely tough. Have you had any luck finding the balance? Like people understanding your career?
I think it's complicated. So I'll share that really the week that the story went live, I started seeing someone who I'm excited about. I don't love talking about my dating. I want to keep this sacred to myself.
Fair.
But, it's weird having a story like this go live literally the week that I'm meeting someone I'm excited about. So that is happening in the background as I'm sharing all this right now. What I will say is the thing that has been most healing for me is connecting with other sexuality professionals who are having similar experiences. Or maybe not even just connecting with other sexuality professionals who are having similar experiences to me, but connecting with other sexuality professionals who have in the past had similar experiences to me and now are loved and in supportive partnerships and whose career, previous, current, future, is not an impediment to the love and the partnership that they're currently in.
Oh, you said that so beautifully. For me, I feel like I had to put in work to get there with my partner, but that was a discussion from the beginning. And now we're there. But even I felt like it wasn't a seamless open arms type of situation. And it was more the public side of it than even the job. It's like, oh, our lives going to be this public. But I feel you. So you have met, hopefully, many other educators or people like us who have ended up in relationships.
I've met enough to believe that if it can happen for them, it can happen for me. There's a fear there. It's like, wow, I love this career and I believe so strongly in it. Is this really going to be the thing that I'm forever explaining as a way to prove my lovability to potential suitors? That was really the fear. And I think especially in online dating, there's a lot of sort of snap finger judgments, quick judgments about whether or not a person is compatible with you long term, right? First, there's the judgment of whether or not they're attractive enough for you long term based on just some images. And then there's your initial conversations about, where did you grow up? What do you do? Do you have a dog? Those three, or, there's a few others, is what people use to decide, okay, is there going to be a second date?
100%. I've dated on the East Coast and on the West Coast, well, in Vegas. I do think, when I was dating in New York, those 3 questions, it was intense, and I felt like I was in a job interview on every date because so many people do filter according to that. Sometimes I think in bigger cities, the interest factor, if it's, oh, you're interesting, that provides an edge. Then you don't know if it's long-term or if you're just sort of a novelty in the moment of oh, I get to date the dominatrix. This was back in my dominatrix days. It was my favorite conversation would be, I'd say it and they'd be like, wow, that's so interesting. You're so interesting. But they didn't think I was interesting. They were just interested in that one piece. Like you said, it's sort of like they put a magnifying glass over that one part.
You can almost see them thinking about how they're going to tell their friends the story about the time they went on a date with this dominatrix, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. And that's what they were doing. And then, all the questions follow. But they're not really about me. It's sort of what do you do? They're about the clients I had or whatever situation, or coaching clients now, which I do not share those stories, at least not with real detail. It's just, that's what it becomes. Yeah. One of the things you mentioned about being fetishized, I think is universal for a lot of dominant women. Now, I know we're not talking about dominance and submission right now, but I do know that because there's a perceived shortage of dominant women, a lot of men, as soon as they find one, they turn that person into a kink dispenser. And that's kind of what you were describing too. It's like a fantasy dispenser.
More specifically, I feel like men see me as the person who is going to peg them for the first time because I write a lot about strap-on sex for the internet. And again, I used to coach specifically a strap-on sex workshop. And so actually it's specifically that kink or that interest that I found that men point to and say, oh, you're going to provide that for me.
Yeah. Do they know this before they go on the date with you? Or does it just sort of come out over time?
I have found through trial and error that I don't want to experience anyone's shame. I don't want to swallow anybody's shame. And so the most self-protective thing that I can do for my own peace of mind is actually be really upfront from the beginning with them about what my career is. I don't try to sugarcoat it. And if I clock myself sugarcoating it or dulling it down for my audience, that's then information for me about my comfort level with this person and our compatibility long term. So pretty early on when I was online dating, I would be like, hey, just want to let you know, I am a queer sex journalist. I cover topics like that. Happy to answer any questions. Also happy to talk about it in person. I just like to lay it out because I know that that isn't in alignment with what a lot of people see in their long-term partner. I just name it. At this point, I was just naming it.
I love it. That was also my approach when I was online dating, was to just say, this is what I do. And I'm proud of them for this. They were like, oh, yeah, that's not for me, or I wouldn't be comfortable with that. I have a pretty prominent job. People will often point to their own career as the thing making them step back, or that was my experience when I was dating. I like that you go out the gate. In fact, so many parallels here about, like, even if you're kinky, I recommend people bring it up earlier rather than later. And you just gave a really good point. You don't need to internalize anyone else's shame. They can keep that for themselves, and you can stay true to who you are.
Yeah, I don't feel like I owe sitting across the table from a stranger and sitting with their shame with them, right? That's what I see my professional job being. And so when I'm dating, when I'm looking for friends and partners, that's not my job. Deal with that in your own time.
So you're a freelance journalist. Can we talk a little bit about how you come up with the stories, how so many of your articles and what you teach is about pegging? I'd love to learn more of the history of your intro to kink and just where the passion started for you. Can we start there?
Yep.
Like, where did the passion start? I'm guessing you were the friend everyone talked to about sex. That would be my guess.
So some background information is I went to a women's college where I majored in queer studies and English, which meant that in my undergraduate degree, I actually had the privilege of writing basically about queer sex for grades. And so I was doing this in kind of my undergraduate work and more or less thought it would stay, or at least the sex piece would stay there. Fast forward, my first job out of school is as an intern at Women's Health magazine. And for the most part at that time, I was helping editors with and pitching fitness stories. Anytime we came to a pitch meeting, though, I might say, here are 3 fitness ideas that I'm really interested in. And then I would also suggest an article that was a little bit gay. So that would look like being like, well, why don't we write an article about like how to kiss another girl, or how to tell if you're gay, or how to finger another girl. And keep in mind, this was 2016 when I had this job. And at the time, most publications weren't covering gay sex or LGBTQ issues in the way most publications aren't doing it right now in this particular day and age, but they were really from like 2017 to like 2021. Most publications were covering them. And again, the editors were just like, no. And the reason at the time was there was a belief that, let's say, 10% of the population was gay. So if only 10% of the population is gay, we're not going to write an article and use our resources to pay a writer to write an article that's only going to get 1/10 the clicks and views and therefore advertising dollars compared to an article that might be more attractive to people who are straight. And so time and time again, these various stories that I was pitching about gayness, queerness, queer sex were turned down. Then in about early 2017, Google made a decision that really changed my life. And that was that they, quote unquote, said when people Google sex terms like lesbian sex or anal sex with the hope of winding up on a porn website or at porn content, we don't want the first thing that they see to be those porn or X-rated sites. We want it to be educational sites. You can imagine a lot of people are Googling lesbian sex and anal sex.
Yes.
And so for the first time, these publications had incentive to write articles explaining those different sex acts, how to do them, what they might feel like, how to explore them safely. And so around this time, that's about when all these publications that you see online started publishing basically how-to guides on how to do these various sex acts.
I feel like I've just had an amazing history lesson that I was not expecting. I never knew that. But now that you're saying it, I'm like, that makes so much sense in the rise of articles that have come out in the last 9 years about sex and different kinds of sex. Whoa. Were you working at any particular publication at that point?
At that point, I was freelance writing. And so my editors were used to, at this point, receiving pitches from me that they were turning down on these topics. And so as they started having articles to assign, specifically explaining lesbian sex, gay sex, anal sex, pegging, etc., they said, hey, these might be a little saucier than what you've been pitching, but we are looking for a writer to take this on. Are you interested? And so honestly, right place, right time, I took it on. And then very quickly, I became kind of one of the people that was writing at that intersection.
Wow. So obviously you're queer. You have that experience. Would you say you had to do more research to learn and write this, or were you pulling from things you already knew?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, as a writer, no matter my identity or my sexual experiences, I'm going to bring all of that baggage and information in with me when I'm writing an article. But as a journalist, that's actually not so relevant. I have to interview experts as part of just like putting together an article, putting together a well-researched article. So usually it is my voice that's in the background, but I'm not writing first-person stories most of the time. Most of the time, it's like voiceless how-to guides where I'm then interviewing experts like you, like other sex therapists.
How did all of that turn into you being an expert online in pegging?
Oh, Amanda, it's so funny you asked that because, like, I kind of jokingly say I'm a pegging expert. And in some ways that's true. In some ways it's not. Really, I've just written a lot of articles on the topic for a wide variety of publications. Men's Health, Women's Health, Cosmo, Well and Good when they used to be in business. And so more than anything, I've just had the opportunity over the last decade to write about that topic time and time and time again.
Okay, naturally then, the next question though is, why do you think it's so popular?
Oh, that's a great question. And you'll have to weigh in on this too as a kink expert. I think one, it is focused on the pleasure center of the anus, which is really rich in nerve endings and just a hot zone of potential erogenous tissues.
Oh, yeah.
So I think like the actual pleasure potential itself from just like a touch standpoint is really erotic to some people. I think, too, we have the fact that usually if you're thinking about like a heterosexual cisgender couple, pegging turns the roles on their head.
Yeah.
For the first time, the person who typically does the penetrating is going to be the person who is penetrated. And I think that that can be really psychologically arousing, either to the person who is now the receiver of the anal penetration of the penetration, and also really arousing to the person who typically receives penetration or is penetrated or accepts in the phallus or dildo or toy. So I think there's something to be said about the way it just turns the power dynamic, it turns the typical scripts on their heads and says, okay, turn the scripts on their heads and have pleasure.
Yes. Okay. I am going to weigh into, I completely agree with everything you said. I think there's also a curiosity with things that are considered taboo, right? And then I think more people are doing it now than they admit to, right? So they're not talking openly with their friends. Do you remember that Sex and the City episode where one of them has anal sex and it's this big moment for all the friends to come together?
Yes.
I think pegging is that, and in 20 years, no one's going to be as obsessed with it and it's not going to be as risque. That is my guess. But the other thing, this is just a PSA for women. To your point, people without a penis. The idea of just trying on a strap-on and visualizing yourself that way, experiencing it, seeing it can be thrilling in itself. Like when I was a pro, whether or not I went all the way, wearing a strap-on is something that I did. And I felt so powerful standing in the mirror, looking at a version of myself that was just slightly altered. And I cannot recommend it enough. So everything you said, plus it being taboo, and I just want a PSA to women who feel like they might be scared. They don't want to try it. They're worried about the back door being dirty. I know that's a super common concern. Go read some of Gabrielle's articles, look her up, but also consider pushing past that, even just trying one on and experiencing that, because I think that alone is a thrill that people could enjoy.
And I'll add, and I don't want to say at risk oversharing on this podcast, but risk and oversharing. I think depending on the anatomy of your vulva and where your clitoral gland is located, there's potential for the base of the dildo to press against that hot spot in a way that is really physically pleasurable. So to be clear, like pegging can be psychologically and emotionally and mentally really arousing, but it can also stimulate your vulva in a way that very few other forms of sex do.
That's a really good point. And even if it's not that, they also have strap-ons that include a vibration for you. So there are so many options to make it pleasurable for both people. All of that makes sense. I'm glad we went down that little detour of a conversation. I feel like it's something that whenever it's mentioned, it's really funny you say this though, because I know doing what I do now and what I've done in the past, I have a lot of dominatrix friends, and when they date, some of the first things that a man will say is, "You can't peg me." And it's like, why is that where your mind goes first? So I think it is a really big fantasy we're just not used to sharing yet. Oh, this is fun. I'm like loving all of this. So would you describe yourself as a kinky person?
Oh, The answer is yes, but it wouldn't be the first adjective I use to describe myself or my sex life if I was to make a laundry list of all of them. And I think the reason for that is that the word queer is like so near and dear to my heart and feels so integral to the way that I play sexually. Like the kink of it all is more secondary. And I guess allow me to give some background information on me to maybe explain what this means. I came out as lesbian in high school. Before that, I hadn't dated any men, hadn't kissed any men. And it wasn't until my mid-20s when I came to understand that I'm also attracted to men and now identify as bisexual. Because my early sexual experiences required me to be really creative with what sex meant because I wasn't getting LGBTQ inclusive sex education in high school or school or through media at this time. When I wanted to be intimate with a girlfriend, we really had to figure out what the heck that meant. And that required me approaching sex with this real degree of curiosity and also creativity. And I have carried that through the rest of my sexual life, even after beginning to date and be with cis men and men more broadly. So I think for me, when I say I'm queer and I specifically speak to having queer sex, regardless of the orientation or gender of my partner, what I'm really speaking to is approaching my sex life with a kind of curiosity and creativity that I don't think is implied by the word sex alone. And in a lot of ways, I think there's a tremendous amount of overlap in the way I'm describing my queer sex and what you might say is kink. And so it's I'm kinky. And also, it's not the first word that I speak to.
That made so much sense. From the way I relate to it or how it resonated for me was I have a fetish, which you probably understand, but I'm always on this soapbox. There's a difference between a kink and a fetish. A fetish is a need to have, a kink is a nice to have. I would say I'm kinky because I have a fetish. And everyone knows my fetish is spanking and punishment. The media wasn't representing it in any way except for maybe seeing a leather or latex clad woman with a whip. And I was like, that isn't me. I didn't have context for what turned me on. And it led me to be more curious and explore a bunch of other things as I tried to get to the core of who I am. And once I figured that out, also in my mid-20s, and I was like, oh, I'm not kinky. I am, but that's not the main driving force. It's this actual fetish. I don't know, every way you described it, I was like, yes, what is it about our mid-20s and finally discovering who we actually are? And I don't know what it is. I think maybe it's just not worrying so much about society or not looking to society as much to define it. Was there a catalyst for you?
Honestly, my attraction to a man, which then I later discovered was attraction to multiple men, hit me like a brick out of nowhere. I was working at a CrossFit gym one day. A guy walked in and I was like, you.
Whoa.
And then that was it. It was the first time I'd ever experienced attraction to that gender in that way. And then after that, I've now experienced that multiple times. So was there a catalyst? I don't know. I think it just was. I think our sexuality evolve. I'm not saying that you're doing this, and I think you'll understand where I'm going when I say this. It's I hesitate to ask myself why that happened with too much interest in finding out, because I don't want to accidentally pathologize the fact that honestly, for me, it was kind of random. There wasn't this one event that happened that then transformed my sexuality from there on out. My sexuality is always this ever-evolving thing. I like things now that I didn't like 10 years ago. And when I was 23, 24, the thing that evolved in my sexuality was the genders I was attracted to.
That makes complete sense. And I do understand it because I oscillate between totally being obsessed, though, with understanding where my fetish came from and totally ignoring it and being like, it does not matter. Do you know what I mean? And I go between.
Well, that's the sex nerd in you.
Yeah, I guess it is. And then I have clients come to me and they're like, I want to know where it's from. I'm like, let's not focus on where it's from. Let's talk about how you can enjoy it now. Because I do think sometimes it gets in the way of the enjoyment of it, at least for me. Because I'm like, am I weird? Everyone's weird. So it's not even a fair question. So you're working towards becoming a sex therapist. You're currently a freelance journalist. In a future world where budget is not an issue, right? What would you like to write about? What direction would you like your career to go so that you're able to bring it all together?
Oh, this question is so fun and honestly makes me a little sad because, to be honest, the answer I would give today is probably quite different than the answer I would have given 2 or 3 years ago. At risk of sounding self-congratulatory, but I felt like I was swimming in work and assignments 3, 4, 5 years ago. I just felt like all of these publications were really focused on pushing out sex education content. And that honestly is not the case right now. A lot of publications are really pulling back on their sex education content. And so what I want to write about, it's like I'd be happy just writing sex education content, 101 level guides on sex toys, sex positions, and various sex acts like lesbian sex and anal sex in the way that I was years ago. And that's because I want that information to continue to be readily available on the internet. And I don't know if that's possible. So then if it's possible in this political climate with the publications just pulling back on budgets specifically on their sex content. And just as background, the reason a lot of these publications are pulling back on their sex content specifically is because it's really hard to get advertisers to agree to put product placements on the sex content. And so as a result, it's just not as lucrative as maybe like a fitness article might be, even if it's getting more views.
I imagine it is getting more views. I see so many more articles shared about sex. Maybe it's because of what I do than fitness on Instagram. I knew where you were going with the advertising, but also promoting it on social media. You can't really talk about this stuff at all outside of, it's really sad because magazines, like the articles you write, are where we got so much information.
It breaks my heart. So I think like the realistic answer, or maybe like the less dreamer answer, is that I really hope that these publications start to change their tune and return to the belief that sex education matters and that sex content matters, and then hire me to write that. Where my passion lies.
I wish that for you. But you've had some big success, at least in the last year or two. Like, not just previously, because I will Google stuff still and your articles will come up and I'm like, damn, she was working overtime. Yeah.
Oh, you're sweet. Yeah, thanks for saying that. So hopefully publications keep hiring us sex journalists. And then beyond that, I would love, love, love to write a book one day. I mean, I'm sure you have people come on here all the time and be like, do you know who Esther Perel is? I want to be like her, but the queer version. And like, yeah, hell yeah. I want to be the sex therapist who puts out books that are really helpful to all people, and also specifically people who are queer or LGBTQ.
All of that was a beautiful answer. I wasn't prepared for how bittersweet it was going to be, though, because it is really tough to see things backslide. I didn't expect it when I was younger. I just was like, this is how it is. And then we got a glimmer of what it could be like and what acceptance could be like. I just get really annoyed at how what happens in politics actually has a huge knock-on effect in all of our media.
Well, and two, I think these extremist identities, which by the way that they're cultivated are ultimately sex negative, are just a really quote unquote easy hat for people to hinge on. Like they give people this sense of belonging. And I think people feel so hopeless that this idea of having an identity and just this like real belief, regardless of how bigotry it is. Bigotry?
Yeah. Bigoted? Bigoted or bigotry?
Journalist stumbling on her words. Classic. Like I think it gives people this kind of identity that feels appealing for them.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's an easy sell to get people on board with that. In writing all of these articles, I'm calling myself out here. Sometimes at the end of the day, the last thing I want to discuss is kink because I feel I've spent my day talking about kink. Have you ever experienced that exhaustion from being overstimulated and thinking about sex ed all day?
The way that I'm tired at the end of the day is the way that I'm tired of working and being on email and being a journalist. The part of my brain I access when I'm writing about sex is a really, really different part of my brain and also body than having sex. So when I finish a day of being a sex journalist, I don't necessarily feel burnt out on sex or like unable to tap into my libido specifically because I'm writing about sex. If anything, though, if I'm experiencing a lot of work stress, either related to deadlines or my email is a mess, then I might be stressed and as a result, less interested in sex because my brain is all over the place.
Yeah.
But it's more of a fatigue around just like being a person who is working. At the end of my workday, every day, I go to the CrossFit gym. I very rarely talk about my career in that space. Both because people don't ask and because I don't feel a need to like really get into the gritty details of it. And also because we're exercising. Like we're breathing so hard that we're not necessarily chatting. And I think for me, having that intentional transition time also helps, right? I am going from my work self where I happen to write about sex and queer sex to, okay, now I'm going to get my sweat on.
So the advice I'm hearing, not that I asked for advice specifically, is go outside, Amanda, because I am at home all day. I need to try going outside and touching grass.
You're like, yeah, touch grass, get that vitamin D, breathe good air.
Yeah. I play pickleball in the mornings, but like that is my one thing. Ooh, by the way, pickleball is the most social sport I've ever done.
Yes.
So if you're into it. Okay, final question, because I think you've indirectly given so much great advice. Do you have any advice for someone who may have been on a similar journey as you in exploring their sexuality or even finding and exploring and accepting themselves and their sexuality?
That's a great question. Something that's helpful for me to think about, and I touched on this, is the idea that your sexuality isn't just your sexual orientation, right? Your sexuality is this massive umbrella that has all these prongs underneath it. One is your sexual orientation. One is your romantic orientation. One's your relationship orientation, your kinks, your fantasies, the time of day you like to have sex, your sex education, any shames that you're carrying. Like, it's this giant umbrella with all these things underneath. And so if you're questioning your sexual orientation or exploring that in yourself, it's helpful for me to remember that that's one prong and there's many. When I remember that, I think it feels less destabilizing to consider my sexual orientation evolving because there's all these other things that are still true about me.
Oh, I love that answer. That is the perfect answer. No notes. I do have to ask you one question. Who is the most interesting person you've ever interviewed? Tough question, I know, like, or fascinating. Maybe even just the person you were most excited to interview.
Well, I did interview Esther Perel. And so since I mentioned her, I have to mention that I interviewed her for a Pop Sugar story. And that to me was very much like career bucket list.
Oh, okay, because now I'm fangirling. What was she like? Was she a good person to interview?
It was great. She was straightforward. She answered exactly the questions. There wasn't a tremendous amount of fluff, but she was very generous in the way that she just communicated all of the knowledge that she has.
Oh, of course she was. Perfect answer too. Okay. Gabrielle, thank you so much for coming on today. So for everyone listening who wants to find you, where can they find you?
My Instagram would be great. And it's just my first name and my last name, Gabrielle Cassel.
That'll be in the show notes along with the article that I referenced at the beginning. Gabrielle, thank you so much for joining. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. Chat soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out. Email info@thekinkconsultant.com. Until next time, keep on kinking on.